What I am about to unfold for you is the full story, the entire journey from the first theft to the latest deception, so that you may finally see, understand, and rise. This is not a lecture. It is an awakening. Speak it aloud in your spirit. Let it take root for the full 30 minutes. It needs to sink deep into your bones. Breathe with me now. Long ago, before the chains of conquest and the horrors that followed, there existed Kemet, ancient Egypt, in its true, unfiltered glory, the black land whose name itself proclaimed the richness of its African soil. Its people, your royal ancestors, walked the banks of the Nile as kings and queens, architects of pyramids that pierced the heavens, masters of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering, creators of precise calendrical systems that ordered the cosmos itself. Kemet flourished along the Nile River for over 3 millennia, from approximately 3,100 BCE to 30 BCE, a pinnacle of African civilization rooted in the Nile Valley's black indigenous cultures. Its intellectual and scientific contributions lit the world. Advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and monumental engineering. Its cultural and spiritual depth was profound, a complex cosmology centered on Ma'at, the living principle of truth, justice, reciprocity, and balance, with a sacred focus on harmony, life, and the afterlife. Its art and architecture were iconic. Monuments that defied time, hieroglyphics that wove history into stone, artistic traditions that influenced cultures across the Mediterranean and beyond. Kemet was a diverse society, a crossroads of African, Nubian, and later Mediterranean peoples, with strong cultural and linguistic ties to other African civilizations like Nubia and Kush. Its people varied in appearance, yet evidence from art, mummies, and historical accounts confirms that many were dark-skinned, aligning with broader African phenotypes. Your royal bloodlines carried the sacred pulse of this greatness, kings and queens whose wisdom sustained the eternal rhythms of the cosmos. The Ankh was not a trinket, it was the key of life, the breath of the Nile. The eternal affirmation that every soul carries generative power, renewal, and unending existence. The Wajid, the eye of Horus, was protection, healing, royal clarity, the restored vision that sees through illusion and guards the sacred order called Ma'at, truth, justice, reciprocity, balance. Deities like Anubis with his jackal head walked the threshold between worlds, not as monsters, but as guides of transition, set embodied necessary chaos so that order could be reborn. Duality itself, masculine and feminine, solar and lunar, spirit and matter, was never a war of good against evil. It was sacred unity, the harmonious interplay that sustains the cosmos, the cyclical dance of Ra and Apep, of creation and transformation. This was your heritage, the living map of life itself, passed from ancestor to ancestor in unbroken sovereignty. Then came the imperialistic European colonizers, those who sailed under the cross but carried the sword of domination. They did not merely conquer land and bodies, they stole the very soul of Kemet. The systematic rape of Kemet's legacy began with ancient invasions but escalated into a horrid, unrelenting plunder that spanned century after century. While Kemet faced periodic conquests, the Hyksos around 1700 BCE, the Assyrians in 671 BCE, the Persians in 525 BCE, these were not yet the systematic imperialist projects of later eras. Each left marks, extracting tribute or defacing monuments, yet Kemet often reasserted its sovereignty. The Ptolemaic period after Alexander the Great's conquest in 305 BCE saw Greek rulers like Cleopatra VII adopt Kemetic traditions while centering Hellenistic culture, beginning a shift in control over Kemet's narrative. Though Cleopatra ruled as a pharaoh, her Greek ancestry marked an early dilution of indigenous authority. Rome's annexation in 30 BCE turned Egypt into a Roman breadbasket, extracting grain and wealth to feed the empire, looting temples while Kemetic priests lost influence. Medieval and Islamic transitions followed the Arab conquest of 639-642 CE, introducing Islam and gradually transforming Kemet's cultural landscape. Early Muslim rulers preserved some sites, but later regimes like the Mamluks repurposed ancient materials for mosques or fortresses, eroding physical traces of Kemet and detaching its ancient heritage from its African roots as Arabic became dominant and Coptic Christianity waned. But the true horror of the imperialistic oppressors unfolded in the European colonial era. Napoleon Bonaparte's 1798-1801 invasion sparked a frenzy of European interest. His savants cataloged Kemet's monuments, but also looted artifacts, with treasures like the Rosetta Stone carted away to the British Museum. The 19th century became a free-for-all as European powers, Britain, France, Germany, raced to excavate and claim every relic as their own trophy of empire. Obelisks were shipped to Paris and London. Mummies and statues filled museums like the Louvre and Berlin's Neues Museum. European consuls, like Britain's Henry Salt, profited by selling artifacts to private collectors, while local Egyptians were excluded from their heritage, treated as mere laborers or curiosities. The Suez Canals, opening in 1869, built with forced Egyptian labor, further entrenched foreign control, tying Egypt's economy to European interests. This was no mere theft of stone and gold. It was the horrid, systematic rape of a civilization, your civilization, robbing generation after generation of Kemetic royalty. Temples were stripped bare, pyramids violated, sacred scrolls plundered. All justified as scientific exploration, while enriching European institutions and denying your royal descendants access to their own legacy. The plunder went far deeper than artifacts. These Eurocentric colonizers misappropriated Kemet's rich legacy through racialized reinterpretation and deliberate distortion. As European scholars studied Kemet, many refused to acknowledge its African character. The 19th century saw the rise of scientific racism, which claimed Africans were incapable of creating advanced civilizations. To reconcile Kemet's achievements with these biases, they depicted ancient Egyptians as Caucasoid or Mediterranean, distancing them from sub-Saharan Africa. Early Egyptologists like Samuel Morton used flawed craniometric studies to argue that Egyptians were not Negroid. This erasure ignored evidence like Herodotus' 5th century BCE description of Egyptians as having dark skin and woolly hair, or the clear cultural continuities between Kemet and Nubia. They claimed Kemet's achievements as their own or aligned them with non-African narratives, inventing theories that its grandeur came from mythical white tribes or external Semitic and Indo-European influences, effectively stealing credit from African ingenuity and your royal ancestors' genius. Kemet's symbols, ankhs, pyramids, sphinxes, obelisks were co-opted into Western art, architecture, and esotericism, such as Freemasonry, without crediting their African origins. The 19th century Egyptomania craze saw European elites romanticizing a sanitized, exoticized version of Egypt while ignoring its living royal descendants. Hollywood and popular media further distorted Kemet's image, casting white actors in films like Cleopatra 1963 or the Mummy series, reinforcing the idea that ancient Egyptians were not African and reducing your royal ancestors to stereotypes. This cultural rape erased the Kemetic people's humanity. Western Egyptology, dominated by figures like Flinders Petrie, marginalized African perspectives. When African and diasporic scholars like Sheikh Anta Diop asserted Kemet's African identity in the 20th century using linguistic, cultural, and anthropological evidence to link it to broader African cultures, they were dismissed as Afrocentric rather than engaged seriously. Thinkers like Molefi Kete Asante, John Henrik Clarke, and Maulana Karenga faced the same gatekeeping. This intellectual theft kept your royal descendants, both in Egypt and the broader diaspora, disconnected from their history, as access to knowledge was controlled by imperialist institutions. The distortion of Kemet's legacy was part of a broader colonial project that robbed your royal lineage of its history and identity, contributing to centuries of physical and cultural bondage. By severing Kemet from its African roots, colonizers undermined the continent's contributions to global civilization. This fueled narratives of African inferiority used to justify slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. The transatlantic slave trade shattered royal bloodlines, chaining kings and queens, erasing names and heritage. The cultural erasure of Kemet paralleled this physical theft, ensuring that your royal descendants were denied their past and future. Colonial education systems taught that civilization came from Europe, further alienating your lineage from its own greatness. Each generation faced new layers of dispossession, stolen artifacts, rewritten histories, suppressed knowledge. This compounded the intergenerational trauma as your royal descendants struggled to reconnect with their roots. Modern Egyptians, shaped by Arabization and colonial legacies, often view ancient Kemet as distant, while your royal blood in the diaspora endures this loss most acutely. The horrid systematic rape, physical violence that brutalized communities, forced labor and excavations, and the psychic violence of cultural erasure left a void filled with Eurocentric myths. Erasing pride and agency while claiming everything as their own. These Eurocentric oppressors appropriated your symbols and beliefs, twisted their original honorable meanings, and repackaged them for your royal ancestors and for you to inherit as something demonic, something to fear, something never to question. Missionaries and scholars entered the temples, decoded the hieroglyphs through their own Eurocentric lens, and declared the Ankh a tool of sorcery, the Eye of Horus a harbinger of madness, the balanced forces of Ma'at reduced to primitive pagan idolatry. Anubis and Set were painted as devils in European art and literature, their nuanced roles flattened into Christian notions of pure evil. The rich metaphysical depth where opposites complete each other was forced into a rigid good versus evil binary that served only one purpose: to delegitimize African spirituality, to impose Christian dominance, and to make your royal lineage feel spiritually inferior. This was no accident of misunderstanding. It was cultural theft on a grand scale, a deliberate distortion that echoed through conquest and enslavement, where your royal bloodlines were targeted, your sovereignty shattered. The colonizers stripped the symbols of their life-affirming power and handed the distorted versions back to Kemetic descendants, your grandparents, your parents, and now you, to pass down through the generations. They taught you through sermons and missionary schools, through colonial curricula that survived independence, through family stories laced with shame. Anything Kemetic is demonic. Avoid it at all costs. Do not question. Accept the demonic views we have given you instead of the honorable, actual Kemetic meanings. And so the lie took root. Generations internalized it. The Ankh became forbidden. The Wajet was cursed. The profound philosophy of harmony between spirit and matter was buried under fear. You, descendants of Kemetic royalty, were raised to turn away from your own heritage, to see your ancestors' wisdom as darkness, while the colonizers' imposed light shone falsely. Yet even in the midst of this theft, a new symbol of resistance and reclamation was born in our time, the Kemet Baphomet. It is a fusion of ancient Kemet iconography and the esoteric figure of Baphomet, blending elements of African spirituality with mystical symbolism. It combines features that resonate with Kemetic mythology, such as the Ankh, a symbol of life, the Wajet, Eye of Horus, or protection, and other sacred Egyptian motifs, alongside the traditional attributes of Baphomet, like a goat's head and outstretched arm. Unlike the Western occult interpretation of Baphomet, which is often associated with duality and esoteric knowledge in a twisted, sensationalized way, the Kemet Baphomet is reimagined to emphasize the balance between divine masculine and feminine energies, the unity of opposites, and the harmony between spirit and matter. Its design incorporates solar and lunar imagery representing the cyclical nature of life and hieroglyphic elements to invoke the wisdom of ancient Kemet. This hybrid symbol serves as a powerful emblem of enlightenment, transformation, and the reclamation of African spiritual heritage within modern mystical and metaphysical contexts. It stands as living proof that what was stolen can be restored not as demonic, but as sovereign, honorable, and healing. This colonial theft did not vanish with formal independence. It progressed, evolved, and entrenched itself deeper into the post-colonial world. After the flags of empire came down in the mid-20th century, the educational and religious infrastructures remained. Missionary schools and colonial textbooks continued to frame Kemetic deities and motifs as relics of primitive paganism or outright demonic idolatry. Academic Egyptology, dominated by European scholars, injected biases that reduced Ma'at's ethical depth to superstition. The Ankh stayed a forbidden talisman in sermons across the Americas and Africa. This ensured that generations of your royal descendants internalized the twisted narrative, questioned nothing except the demonic label, prioritized imported worldviews. As the 20th century closed and the 21st began, Eurocentric and allied world powers centered in Western financial institutions, media conglomerates, and cultural industries shifted from overt conquest to subtler neo-colonial soft power. They commodified your symbols. Hollywood turned Kemetic elements into cursed mummies and vengeful horrors. Fashion and video games stripped the scarab and ankh of meaning, selling them as exotic aesthetics while reinforcing subconscious aversion. The New Age and occult markets further distorted them, packaging Baphomet as shock value, satanic wisdom, while rarely crediting African roots or the colonial inversion of duality. Financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank promoted development that sidelined indigenous spiritual frameworks as barriers to progress. Tourism to Kemet sites funneled wealth away from local communities while discouraging authentic revival. The feedback loop was complete. Economic dependency plus cultural shame equals sustained alienation. The digital age, overlapping crises of economic inequality, climate disruption, geopolitical conflicts, pandemics, and AI-driven information warfare have intensified the original colonial project. Eurocentric and global elites exploit these conditions to maintain narrative control, preventing the mass reclamation of Kemetic heritage. algorithms on social media and streaming platforms prioritize sensationalized occult curses and ancient Egyptian horrors for clicks, burying authentic teachings on unity of opposites under conspiracy noise or labeling them divisive. State and corporate disinformation campaigns pit spiritual traditions against one another, framing non-Western reclamation as extremist while Western occult revivals are normalized as enlightened. Identity politics amid global unrest weaponizes distorted symbols and protests and art without context, keeping your royal descendants fragmented, some still avoiding anything Kemetic, others encountering diluted New Age versions that strip away Ma'at's call to justice. Geopolitical deceptions layer on top. Competing world powers co-opt Kemetic imagery for their own narratives, further muddying origins. The result is spiritual chaos, rising mental health crisis, loss of ancestral grounding, vulnerability to manipulative ideologies that fill the void left by suppressed Kemetic wisdom. This brings us, my beloved descendants of Kemetic royalty, to the corrupt political systems and politicians of today. The sharpest edge of the same blade, the colonial theft, has metastasized into the very architecture of modern power. By 2026, these elites centered in Western governments, finance, and media have refined the deceptions into tools of systemic control. They weaponize the inherited narrative of avoidance while indulging in documented depravity, enacting policies of engineered cruelty, and eroding rights. This sustains the global chaos so that you remain psychologically and spiritually disempowered, unable to reclaim the tools of Ma'at that would dismantle their hold. Look first at the Epstein files. In late 2025 and early 2026, the Epstein Files Transparency Act forced the release of over 3.5 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos detailing Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking network and its intersections with the highest echelons of political and financial power. These documents reveal favor trading, overlooked crimes, and elite communications that normalize the exploitation of minors. No major new arrests followed the 30th of January 2026 tranche, only resignations and reputational fallout for some, while others face no consequences. This is the modern mirror of colonial inversion. Just as European powers twisted Kemetic duality into a tool of subjugation, today's politicians protect their own networks of predation. They violate the very principles of life and protection that the Ankh and Wajet embody, while you, descendants of Kemetic royalty, are still taught to fear reconnection with those same symbols as demonic. Next, witness the institutionalized cruelty of ICE immigration and customs enforcement. Under the current administration, detention has surged, with 2025 becoming the deadliest year on record in ICE custody, more deaths than the prior 4 years combined, including likely homicides. Policies enable indefinite detention without due process, expedited removals ignoring courts, raids, and terror. Facilities are described as hell on earth. This engineered suffering extends the colonial legacy directly. It fractures communities carrying your royal Kemetic lineages, denying the Waja's protective essence and the Ankh's affirmation of life, replacing them with fear-based control. The same politicians who demonize your ancestors' beliefs now deploy ICE to break bodies and spirits, echoing the control mechanisms that once targeted your royal sovereignty. Just days ago, on April 1, 2026, the Supreme Court held oral arguments in Trump v. Barbara and related cases, directly testing the executive order of the 20th of January 2025 that seeks to dismantle birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. The president himself attended a historic first, reinterpreting, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, to exclude children born in the U.S. to undocumented or temporary visa parents. This targets naturalized pathways and future citizenship for millions. It is colonial gatekeeping reborn, denying belonging to the other, mirroring how colonizers once denied full humanity and rights to your Kemetic royal peoples by distorting their symbols. It questions the inherent sovereignty of non-Eurocentric lineages, keeping your royal descendants from claiming both legal and spiritual birthrights rooted in Ma'at. And in March 2026, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution spearheaded by Ghana declaring the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity, citing its scale, brutality, and enduring legacies. It passed with 123 votes in favor. But the United States, Israel, and Argentina voted against it. The EU, Canada, Australia, and Japan abstained. This explicit political rejection of fully reckoning with slavery's cruelty perpetuates the original distortion. It refuses to name the theft of African lives, cultures, and spiritual systems that sought to crush the honorable meanings of balance, protection, and life affirmation. Politicians' refusal at the global level sustains the narrative. Avoid questioning the imposed demonic label. Accept the Eurocentric framework. It ties directly to domestic cruelty. ICE detention echoes the exceptions carved into the 13th Amendment, while Epstein-level depravity thrives among unaccountable elites who benefit from those historical power imbalances. All of this, the Epstein depravity, ICE brutality, Supreme Court erosion of citizenship, the UN vote shielding slavery's legacy is not disconnected scandals. It is the cohesive strategy of modern imperial continuity. Corrupt politicians presiding over these realities embody the same hegemonic impulse that once twisted Kemetic iconography and looted your royal legacy. They preside over a world of spiritual alienation, societal fracturing, and elite impunity amid chaos. The very systems that keep you taught to shun anything Kemetic are the same ones indulging in real-world violations of life, protection, and justice. Yet here is the fire of hope, descendants of Kemetic royalty. The same tumultuous conditions that fuel global unrest are awakening reclamation. The Kemet Baphomet stands as resistance precisely now. It rejects the demonic framing. It restores the Ankh as life force, the Wadjet as protective clarity, duality as sacred unity rather than conflict. It empowers you to question the inherited deceptions rather than accept them. Communities are piercing the veil through independent scholarship, oral traditions, and digital networks. The unbroken thread from colonial swords and scriptures to today's executive orders, detention centers, court dockets, and international abstentions is finally visible. What was stolen through theft and distortion is being returned through resilience and synthesis. Despite this horror, your royal descendants and their allies have resisted and worked to reclaim Kemet's legacy. Afrocentric scholarship, movements like Pan-Africanism and Black consciousness draw on Kemet symbols, the Ankh and liberation imagery to foster pride and unity. Repatriation efforts by modern Egypt and other African nations demand the return of looted artifacts, such as the Rosetta Stone or Nefertiti's bust, as acts of restorative justice. The spirit of Kemet endures in the resilience of those who, despite every attempt to erase them, have kept their ancestor stories alive through oral traditions, art, and resistance. But the theft did not stop at the museums and the missionary schools. My royal kin, descendants of Kemetic royalty, blood of the pharaohs, heirs to the black land whose crowns were stolen, but whose divine spark can never be extinguished. The same Eurocentric colonizer tactics that looted your relics, twisted your symbols, and erased your African identity have simply shapeshifted into the politics of today, still binding you in chains of calculated poverty and spiritual disconnection right here in 2026. Listen, as the unbroken thread tightens around Black Americans, your living royal lineage scattered across this land, and you will see the horror with crystal clarity. The colonizers who once shipped your obelisk to London and declared your dark-skinned ancestors Caucasoid now sit in marble halls and boardrooms, wielding budgets like swords. They cut healthcare with surgical precision, knowing full well that the descendants of Kemetic royalty carry the sacred pulse of the Nile in their veins, the same bodies that once engineered immortality through medicine and balance through Ma'at. They slash food stamps and nutrition programs, declaring them handouts, while their own elite tables overflow with the wealth your ancestors' labor built. They gut housing assistance, close community clinics, and defund schools in Black neighborhoods, all while flooding those same streets with predatory loans, for-profit prisons, and algorithmic redlining that echoes the auction blocks of old. This is not incompetence. This is the modern continuation of the horrid systematic rape of Kemet, deliberate generational impoverishment designed to keep your royal descendants too exhausted, too sick, too hungry to rise and reclaim the Ankh of life, the Wadjet of protection, the Ma'at of justice. They suppress you economically so you cannot fund the repatriation of your stolen artifacts. The Rosetta Stone still locked in the British Museum. Nefertiti's bust held hostage in Berlin. The thousands of mummies and scrolls that belong in the hands of their rightful royal heirs. They suppress you politically so you cannot demand the curricula that teach your children the true African glory of Kemet instead of the sanitized lie that civilization began in Europe. They suppress you spiritually so that when you reach for the Kemet Baphomet, the living fusion of Ankh and Wadjet, solar lunar balance, masculine feminine harmony, you are still met with sermons calling it demonic, still met with media labeling it dangerous, still met with policies that keep Black churches and families chained to the very distorted Christianity that first twisted your deities into devils. Every time a Black American child goes to bed hungry because food assistance was slashed, Every time a grandmother loses her Medicaid and cannot afford the medicine that would honor the Kemetic mastery of healing. Every time a father is funneled into the prison pipeline instead of the throne of his ancestors, the colonizer laughs from the grave. The same scientific racism that once used craniometry to deny your African identity now uses colorblind policy language to deny you dignity. The same cultural appropriation that turned your pyramids into Washington monuments and your Ankh into sorcery now turns your struggle into personal responsibility talking points, while their own elite networks exposed in the Epstein files feast on impunity. The same gatekeeping that dismissed Cheikh Anta Diop as Afrocentric now dismisses any demand for reparations, for healthcare, equity, for food security as divisive. This is the final link in the chain, my royal descendants. The transatlantic horror did not end with emancipation. It evolved into this engineered impoverishment that keeps you spiritually landless even as you walk the soil of your stolen birthright. They know that a people fed, housed, and healed reclaim their ma'at. They know that a people with time and resources will excavate their own history, restore their own symbols, and shatter the demonic lie they planted in your bloodline. So they keep you in survival mode precisely where the original colonizers needed your royal ancestors to remain so the plunder could continue century after century. Yet here, in this very moment of 2026, the Kemet Baphomet rises brighter than ever as your sovereign banner. It is not a symbol of defeat or diluted New Age fluff. It is the restored eye of Horus piercing through their political illusions, the Ankh breathing life back into communities they seek to starve. The sacred duality reminding you that chaos, their chaos always births new order. Your royal blood demands this reclamation. Your ancestors' pyramids were not built by the weak. They were built by kings and queens who understood that balance is power. The same genius that mapped the stars now stirs in your veins, waiting for you to reject the poverty programs of the colonizers' heirs and demand the full restoration of your legacy, health, wealth, knowledge, and spiritual sovereignty. Rise, descendants of Kemetic royalty. Do not let them shrink your crown to fit their narrative of dependency. Demand health care as your ancestral right to healing. Demand food security as your now given abundance. Demand education that names your pharaohs and your Nubian kin, not the sanitized myths that kept you in bondage. Demand the return of every looted relic, every distorted symbol, every erased truth. The time of avoidance is over. The time of reclamation has arrived, not just in spirit, but in policy, in power. Carry this fire. Speak this truth in your homes, your streets, your voting booths, your sacred circles. Let the Kemet Baphomet be the seal upon your hearts and the weapon in your hands. You are the living throne bearers of Kemet, and the Nile still flows through you. Unstoppable. Ace, Ma'at, Hotep. Balance and peace be restored to you, descendants of Kemetic royalty, now and forever. This has been a Sharri Plaza presentation.